Hi everyone. So my name's Ian Miell. The title of this talk is Docker Enterprise Checklist, but another title of it could be Why the hell haven't I got Docker yet? Which is what I get asked every single day. So I started getting into Docker about 3 years ago, and I'll talk a bit more about how I got here. But I wrote a book on Docker called Docker in Practice, which is written very much more from a kind of practical, I've got root on my box kind of thing. But in the course of the last 2 years, I've gone on a journey of trying to get Docker in production in a much larger context. So I'll talk about that as we go. So I'll talk a bit about the structure of the talk. I'm going to talk a bit about the background of how I got here, some of the core challenges you have, or I've had, getting Docker to production, along with the help of many others. I've divided that up into 3 sections: culture, politics, and technical. And then I'll talk a bit more about some of the technical challenges of that, dividing up into build, ship, and run. And then finally some sort of tips or experience that I've had. So this is a chance for me to do a bit of market research while I'm here. So how many people here are comfortable with using Docker as a technology? So yeah, more or less all of you. How many of you used an orchestrator in anger? Okay, so about half. How many use a platform like OpenShift or Rancher or anything like that? Okay, a similar number. How many work for a company of less than 1,000 people? Okay. More than 5,000? And more than 100,000? Okay, right. And how many are running Docker in production? Okay, working on it? Okay. So there's quite a mix in the room of different levels of experience and comfort with the technology. And I'm guessing Kubernetes is more popular than Swarm. Anyone? Oh, one. And Mesos or Mesosphere or DCOS. Okay, one. Okay. And how many are using an APAS? How many people don't know what an APAS is? Okay. So an APAS is an application platform as a service. So when my current company approached me, they were talking about APAS and IaaS, and I didn't know what they were talking about. So I've had to learn a lot of that pretty quickly. So into that background, I worked for a software house called OpenBet, who are a direct competitor of Playtech. Fantastic company. I worked there for 15 years, and we went from, I was 38th to join back in 2000 and something, and stayed there until 2015. And we grew to 700 people. So from my perspective, we'd gone from very agile, smart, radical, we used to call it rad or hacking, and then we called it agile, but basically it just meant just do it. And we went from that to a company of 700 people. Looking back, we were still very agile. We were still very fast moving, but we didn't see it that way. We saw it as being very enterprisey. And I had lots of workarounds for, sort of what I saw as enterprisey behaviors. So I begged, borrowed, and stole hardware. I broke the network while trying to do stuff. I had a root on my box. These things were not going to work in a much larger organization. And also I moved from a development company, so OpenBet's very much a software development house, as is Playtech. And now I work in an infrastructure team. So I'm sort of in the belly of the beast. Hence the, why have I not got Docker yet? So I have lots of developers phoning me up and saying, you're the Docker guy, right? Why can't I just run Docker run from my desktop? And a lot of this talk will be an attempt to answer that question. I did a blog post called Docker Enterprise Checklist on my blog, which is medium.com/zwischenzugs. And I was surprised at how popular it was. I thought it wasn't going to be of much interest to anyone, but it turned out to be one of my most popular posts. And I think there are a lot of people out there who are having to answer the question, why can't we use Docker, or what's it going to take to get Docker into this organization? And I certainly get asked that a lot. So culture. In the end, everything about organizational change or technical change comes down to culture, because in every conversation you might have about why are we doing it this way or how can we do it a different way, you end up butting against sort of cultural assumptions. And I found this image the other day, and I found it a really useful way of structuring your thinking. So at the top you've got artifacts, which are the visible artifacts of your base culture. So things like org charts, documents about business process, documents about software development life cycles, documents about standards across the business. And it was very interesting joining a large organization to see how that related to the assumptions underlying. Because you'd have these documents that said how you should do things, and then loads of people were not doing that. Some of those people were very successful within the organization, and some people just ignored those, and yet that was what you were supposed to do. So figuring out the relationship between the artifacts, the espoused values, which is what the business is trying to do. So for example, a business might say, we want to be DevOps. And they might have a very clear idea of what that means, or they might not have a clear idea of what that means. But they say that's what they want to do. But the artifacts might contradict that. So you might have a change control process that's documented and very heavy and un-DevOpsy. And then underlying those espoused values, you have tacit assumptions, which may match those espoused values or not. So you might have underlying assumptions that are, we just don't do it like that, or we can't make change because of security and audit. We can't do this because of that. So one way to look at it is org chart. Bob is CIO. Bob is pushing forward the business in the right direction. He's turning us into a DevOps organization, and no one listens to Bob. Everyone ignores him, and just, the business carries on. So that's culture. And specifically about Docker, you have sort of two areas where culture's quite big in your organization, I think. So one, you've got history. If you've been in an organization that's over 100,000 people or is of significant size, you've probably existed for quite a long time. And a lot of business processes and departments and assumptions and artifacts and espoused values derive from that history. And specifically where I work now, there's a lot of assumptions around the concept of the machine. So people still think of every project in terms of how many machines do we need. And that's changed in the last few years with VMs, but it's still machine-based. And so Docker challenges that by coming up with the concept of the application being the unit of shipment. And that is sometimes it's very hard to have conversations about that, because it always goes back to what machine is it running on, and how am I going to install it on there, and all these things. And secondly, your organization will have a very different security stance, and that bleeds into every conversation you can have, depending on how important that is for your business. So where I was before, that wasn't a particularly significant aspect of projects. There would be a consideration of security, but it wouldn't be something that was woven into every part of the process. And I found this on DevOps Reactions. Anyone seen that website? Very good. Look it up, DevOps Reactions, and this one is titled "When SecOps Arrives at the Meeting." And I sent that to a colleague after I saw it, and he said, "I've just been to that meeting." So secondly, there's a question of what does the organization want Docker for, if they want it at all. So a lot of people say they want Docker, but you have to ask, what are they trying to achieve? So from a developer point of view, they just want access to everything and they want root. Okay, that's what generally they want. But if you're talking about a high level decision making level, they might want it to facilitate DevOps, whatever they mean by that. They might want to max pack their infrastructure, so they've got this huge data center and they want to fit more stuff on it rather than spending another 5 million or billion or whatever it is on a new data center for the next 10 years. They might want to separate build from run, infrastructure from code, which might be seen as against DevOps or for DevOps, depending on how you define DevOps, but that's a good driver for a lot of things. To increase auditability, because the Docker image gives you a single point where you can actually improve the level of security and auditability within your business. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. Or is it a Me Too thing? So I get this all the time, where someone phones up or says to me, "Oh, all these other banks are doing DevOps. Are doing Docker, and they're all really way far ahead." But the reality is not quite like that. A lot of people are struggling with the same kind of challenges. And finally, there's another sort of aspect of culture, which is vendor culture. So I've really noticed in the last 18 months that there's a real gap between a lot of vendors in this space who move very quickly and have a lot of control over their own environments, coming into enterprises and saying, "We've got the solution you need to do this. All you need to do is install this thing, or give me a day, I'll come in, I'll show you how awesome it is, and you'll want to buy it." And they don't see all the barriers you have to get past to actually deploy something within an organization. So I've spent a lot of time trying to explain to vendors that challenge, and that it's less about the technology than about building the right pathways to production. And finally, ecosystem sprawl. So I don't know if you've seen how many products there are related to Docker out there now, but I stopped looking after about a year, because it was every day it was something new in my inbox that I was supposed to look at. But there's a lot out there. Okay, so that's culture. The second one is politics. So when I was thinking about how to get Docker in, I sort of turned up my organization and I thought, well, I'm a Docker expert, right? So I just phone up the right person, explain to them what I need to do, what I want to do, and they'll sign a check and I'll make it all happen. And it really doesn't work like that at all. So there's an old quote, I can't remember, does anyone know whose quote it was? People who are serious about software need to get serious about hardware. I think it's someone who worked for Intel or something, or maybe Apple. But I think, if you're really serious about software in an enterprise anyway, you have to get serious about people. So finding out who makes decisions, who actually has the money, which isn't always very obvious, and what do they want from you, and what can you give them? These are questions that I found very surprisingly hard to answer in a large organization. The decision-making process can be very opaque. Secondly, it's important to categorize what sort of organization you work for. So as far as I can tell, in large-scale enterprises, there's sort of broadly two sorts of organizations. One where you might have a CTO who comes in or anyone in a position of authority who comes in and says, "We're going to do this," and everyone kind of follows. And then on the other hand, you have organizations which are composed of multiple groups of people who generally converge and agree on a solution, and then you get a bit of top down, and then you get a bit of bottom up, and gradually everything hopefully you make money at the end of the month. And figuring out what sort of organization you are will determine a lot of other decisions you want to make. How is change funded? Is it yearly? Is it a board that meets and decides to spend money ad hoc? Do you have a very free budget within your own department? That's a very important thing to understand. And this feeds into another sort of key kind of area of decision making we had to do when thinking about Docker, which is, since Docker is a very sort of immature product in IT terms, relatively speaking, not just Docker, but the whole surrounding infrastructure around it. So every vendor and so on, they're constantly building new things around it. That's no one's fault. That's just the fact of it. The question is, what do you do? Do you build up piece by piece, slowly over time, or do you do a top-down strategic, get into bed with a vendor or a supplier and work with them to deliver something? So, and how does that fit with the culture of your business? Does your business like doing that? Do they not want to do that? Do they care? That sort of thing. So finally, technical. We talked about ecosystem sprawl. I'm sure many of you know this is a tiny fragment of the Docker space, but it gives some idea of how. I think I've been asked about most of these. in the course of my work, and some of my opinions have been very quickly put together, and some of them have been more considered. But there's certainly a lot of people out there trying to sell things in this space. Okay, so build. Key question is, are you okay with your users having root? Because if you give them Docker, they'll effectively have root. And this is a huge one for us. So the first thing we do when something goes into production is that, or is suggested to go into production, or even sometimes into into dev test, it'll be pen tested, and the pen test will come back with a list of things that are broken. And it's not a case of Docker's been approved by someone. They don't care if the technology has been approved or not. This was something that took me a long time to figure out. The security function within my organization doesn't care about the technology. You could do it with post-its. They'll take those post-its and they'll pen test them. And I started off by having a conversation. Our conversation was like, what do I need to do to get Docker approved? What hoops do I need to go through? And they would say, no, it doesn't work like that. You give us something and we try and break it. And we'll look at your architecture and we'll look at it at a high level, but then we'll just go and try and break it. And the fundamental test is, can we break it? If we can break it, it's not happening. And that's for every application, every single deployment. So are you okay with users having root? If not, how are you going to manage this? So there's lots of solutions out there which are more or less aligned with Docker. So you've got traditional solutions like PowerBroker. Has anyone used PowerBroker? Heard of PowerBroker? Oh, not many people. Okay, so it's basically a wrapper around sudo, which gives you a lot more control and power, and audit. So every time you run a command using PowerBroker, it's logged somewhere. Everything you do in that session is logged, and then those logs can be automatically processed for security and audit checking. So that's one way you can manage it with a tool like that, a wrapper around a traditional tool like sudo. Another way is to have runtime defense products in Docker. So there are products which kind of sit as a layer between the Docker command and the daemon, effectively acting as a proxy, and decide by calling back to a central server whether you can do or not do things. So there's a few offerings in that space. Some of them look quite good. But the level of granularity is a key question for us. So can you go down to saying they can mount volumes, but only volumes in this subdirectory on this host, or maybe even at this time, or by this user. So that's the kind of level of control you might want. And the devil's in the detail with that. So you kind of have to try out these products to see if they actually do what they promise. Auditing, so change control, change records, approval processes. How much do you trust your employees? So Docker obviously facilitates a faster deployment pattern, and how that integrates with your current change control processes is going to be potentially a very interesting question. Is each deployment of a new Docker image a full change that needs to be managed through change control processes that exist already, or is this somehow different? So that's something that is definitely worth some thought about. Desktop experience. It's a big one. It's one I get asked about all the time. So we run Docker in production, but we don't give people the opportunity to build Docker images on their desktop. And that's not through choice. Well, that's not through a deliberate decision-making process. It's more that we don't have the resources to build a solution that works for users. Do you care? Well, every developer cares about that. They want to be able to do Docker run Ubuntu on their desktop and everything works. But many of them are going to be disappointed with what they see, even if they could get Docker on their desktop, because you can't access the outside world from from our environment. So you've got to think about where they're going to get images from and so on. So if you're not going to offer it on the desktop, how easy is it to onboard with your solution? So we use an APAS called OpenShift, which is a Red Hat product based on Origin. Some nodding heads. Do you use? We looked at it. We're not using it. Okay. Why did you not use it in the end?
That was outside of my decision. But it was apparently it was the attractive piece of technology in the whole like OpenStack OpenShift.
Okay.
So that was the good bit. The OpenStack was the last bit.
Well, it's not. You don't have to run it on OpenStack. Yeah. Sorry, I sound like an OpenShift salesman. But when was that, out of interest? When did you look at it?
Not long ago, a couple of months.
Okay, yeah. So it's growing fast as a platform, and I think Red Hat are investing a lot into it. And obviously it uses Kubernetes, so it's quite well aligned, and it's closely aligned with the release cycles, so you kind of get all that stuff for free. But deploying a PaaS into your organization can be difficult because you can't just install it like you could from the open source one, right? You have to think about things like Active Directory, AD, or how you're going to store your images and that sort of thing. So, anyway, I digress. Another aspect of build you need to think about is configuration management. So you may have a configuration management tool that's strategic, a Chef, a Puppet, or Ansible, and you may have lots of people using different kinds of CM tools. Firstly, explaining to people that Docker isn't a CM tool in itself can be a struggle. And people often ask me, how does this relate to our configuration management solution? Do we forget about that and do this instead? And the lines are not always actually very clear. So that can actually be a source of great confusion and distress to people who are looking to use your Docker platform. And you need to think about that early on, because if you start giving people the option to use Docker files and do what they like in there, then your strategic configuration management may be in a different place to where you want it to be. So it's definitely worth thinking about that. Okay, shipping. So you've got your image. What do you do with it? Image scanning. I think Docker gives organizations a massive opportunity to actually exert more control over what goes on in their infrastructure. So because you have this contract between developer and ops, and they can be the same people, but they're two, for the purposes of this discussion, they're two separate roles. Because you have this point of commonality, you can actually use that to provide a lot more assurances and security around the software that's built and run on your infrastructure. So there are lots of tools coming up in this space around image scanning. I think the industry's caught on to the fact that this is a very big deal. So you've got things like you've got Nexus, you've got OpenSCAP, you've got Red Hat providing a solution in this space, you've got Docker's own solution, you've got Aqua, you've got many different providers, and they all seek to answer questions like, is shell shock on any of these containers, on any of these images in our registry? Is there an out-of-date SSL library? Is it based on fundamentally insecure, unacceptable base image? So these are questions that it's going to be really important to answer, because if you don't have a plan for this, then you're going to get this proliferation of images running on the infrastructure, and you don't necessarily know what's on there. And so when the audit department comes knocking, you can't answer the questions that they necessarily want to ask. So that can be a challenge. So another aspect of Docker that's important to consider is how you ingest images. So you might control your perimeter. People can't access Docker Hub, they can't access third-party registries, they can't just pull any image they like. So you've locked them down, in theory, to images from a specific set. So the question is, what happens when a vendor comes along and says, we've got a product, we give it to you as Docker containers, and then you run it on your infrastructure. So you have to make decisions then about, well, where can you run it? Can you run it in the DMZ, or can you run it on the general campus? Is this like a VM, or is it like an RPM? You know, where does Docker fit in that spectrum? And if you are going to view it as a VM, you might have a bunch of processes that you can already leverage to use that. However, those processes might be quite heavy. So someone wants to use BusyBox, then you've got to go through this enormously long process that's designed for bringing F5s into the bank as a whole. If you view it as an RPM, fine, but it's not really an RPM, is it? Because there's a much greater surface area. There are much more libraries in a Docker image than in RPM. So it's a lot harder to make statements about the safety of that item. So definitely that's you've got to think about that quite a lot. So in terms of specific scanners, there are some quite big. I mean, we've done quite a lot of work in this area in my organisation in terms of looking at which scanners, what the differences between the scanners are. So they'll all tell you they find everything, but some of them are very much based on package databases. Some are based on looking for files in specific places where they know they'll be, and some are more deep scanning. So they will find things that are hidden from you. So I guess this relates back to what I said earlier about the trust model of your organization. If you basically trust that people are going to be sensible, you might go for the package-based as a cheaper option. But if you're paranoid about anything and everything that runs on your platform, you'll want something that does deep scanning. So Dockers is an example of a deep scanning, deep scanner. There are some others in that space, but it's definitely worth thinking about the differences between those. And if you look on my GitHub, I've got a project called Bad Dockerfile, which is a reference Docker file that builds an image that is highly unsafe. And if you try and run it, it won't run because the command to run will fail in case someone decides to run it in production. I don't think that'll happen. But we use that as a marker. We run that against various scanners and see how they perform. And it has a list of CVEs that are CVEs and other things that it has in it which you'd want the scanner to find. Okay. And finally, has anyone had an audit from a software audit from a very big supplier? Just for example, beginning with M or O. There's one M going up. These can be very traumatic for some organizations. So some organizations have kind of slept on the job, and suddenly there are thousands and thousands of instances of a database running in an organization, and the vendor comes in and says, we're going to look, and then they present you with a bill. This does happen, and obviously in a world where you're thinking about machines and you're provisioning machines and then putting software on them, it's somewhat easier to contain that, as it were, than in the Docker world where you could have thousands of these things running. So that leads on to another question, which is, if you are planning to run licensed software in your Docker solution, in dev or production, have you thought about the licensing model? Has the vendor thought about the licensing model? Because a lot of vendors are shaking heads. Vendors have phoned me up and said, how do you think this should be charged? Some quite big ones. And people are still trying to figure it out. So it's very much like when VMs came along. I mean, I wasn't around in that space then, but I understand that it was a case of, well, how are we going to charge for this? Because your VM's running on a massive machine. So, and then I think it generally is how many CPUs can you touch with your software. This hasn't really been worked out in the Docker world yet. No one's really comfortable with it. No one really understands how much money they're going to be spending. So one way around this is just to say no licensed software, or you need dispensation or whatever. But as I say, this goes into image scanning. So you want to be able to not only scan for dangerous stuff from a security point of view, you want to scan for stuff you don't want running anywhere anyway. And this can be extended further, not just to licensed software, but to corporate standards. So you might say the corporate standard is to use this jar rather than that jar. So we don't want to use log4j, we want to use log5j or whatever. You could actually go and audit your estate and say, hang on, these 4 teams are using log4j. We don't want that. Go and tell them to stop, give them a warning. That isn't necessarily that easy, or there certainly aren't the opportunities for that at the moment. There are solutions for it, but it's harder to implement. Okay. So there's also the registry. How are we doing for time, by the way?
Fine.
Okay, good. So registry is a big one. So choosing a registry that's right for your business is going to be a big deal. As I say, this central point, it's like an artifact store, but on steroids. So everything's going to be going through this funnel. It could become a very big thing. So you've got to think about, its coherence with other artifact stores. Do you want it to be the same vendor that supplies both your jars and your Docker images in one place? Do you not mind if they're separate? Do you have a signing model? Signing Docker images is not a very mature area at the moment. It's not something that I think I've seen anyone do properly yet. Happy to be contradicted. If so, I'd love to talk. But it's something that enterprises really want, but I don't think there's a definite winner there yet. Does it have a promotion model? So you push your image up to the registry and you either sign it or you some way mark it as ready for production. Is that tied up with your RBAC and authentication process? How easy is it to hook in? And of course, disk space. So has anyone run a registry and run into disk space problems? Yeah, I think everyone who has run a registry has run into that problem. And there are lots of solutions out there that can help at various levels. So organizationally, you can mandate the use of a specific and large base image, which can save you a lot of hassle. Or you can do very clever things with iSCSI and so on, which I don't particularly understand very well myself, but people talk about doing that. So it's definitely worth thinking about that, because disk space is a very limited resource, I think almost everywhere. Okay, so we've done build, ship, now run. So audit and control. So you're running your Docker containers happily in production, and then someone in authority comes along and says, who's running that container? What's going on there? Can you answer that question? Can you say what it is doing? Can you say what it can do? And again, I think Docker gives us a great opportunity to standardize statements about workloads and what they can and can't do. So you've got seccomp, and you've got privileges and capabilities. That's the one. You've got these different vectors of controlling what a container can do, and that gives you a lot of power to report and audit on that. So that's a really useful one. The classic one is, which containers have shell shock. So the next shell shock comes along, how quickly can you answer that question? How quickly can you contact all the people involved and get an email out to tell them to upgrade? Do you want to upgrade, force them to upgrade? Do you want to be able to take their code and rebuild their images for them? Which is one option, but it's not something I think infra teams really want to do. But it's definitely something you have the potential for doing, depending on the severity of the CVE that comes out. Yeah, well, I talked about this already a little bit, but the whole change management process. So is it ready for Docker? Does it have even the concepts of an application-based change that isn't necessarily tied to a machine? I'm asked all the time, which machine is this running on? And I say, well, I don't know. It's running in a cluster with no specific IP, that sort of thing. And some of the forms I have to fill in are just not ready for that. And finally, forensic. This is one I don't see talked about much in the Twitter sphere, but one big question is, you've had your security incident, someone's broken in, someone's done some crazy stuff, but they've done it not on a VM, or a physical bit of tin or a hypervisor or something. They've done it in a container, and that container is gone. So what did it do? What could it do? What logging was there? Where's that logging gone? Can we get that image back? What changed on that image while it was there? All these are questions that actually there are no good answers for yet, as far as I can tell, but they're pretty significant questions. Monitoring is a big one. Everyone asks about monitoring. There are solutions coming up, like Prometheus and so on, which are container oriented, and you have to either pick one or decide to pick one later. And secret management. So how are you going to get secrets, keys, passwords, whatever, onto your containers? So this is something where an APAS can really help, because they have standard solutions for that. But even with those, the devil's in the detail about how those secrets are stored at rest and so on. So you can get into some quite difficult conversations around that. Patching, SDLC. So the software development lifecycle I've talked about, but how do you want to manage patches? Traditionally, a VM is managed by an infrastructure team, and every 3 months they'll upgrade the OS, give you a warning. But how does that work with containers? When the base layer gets upgraded, how are you going to manage that? Are you going to force people to upgrade? Are you going to give them a grace period? All those things. Who owns which layer? So when something goes wrong, who's responsible for it? When does the responsibility shift from the infrastructure team to the development team? And how do you audit which images need updating? Again, in images, do you want to mandate a base image? And if you do, what do you want in there? So I had a conversation with someone recently, and all they could say to me was, no PS, really? No top? So people get very focused on that, and I think generally the world of containers is obsessed with small containers, but I don't really see that as a big deal. To me, it's not actually that much of a saving. You're better off with a fat base image with loads of stuff on it, but it's just personal opinion. Docker promises a world where the OS doesn't matter, but it still does sometimes. You can still have blockages in your release cycle due to having an out-of-date kernel, having an out-of-date operating system, so that the software you're building on top of it, like your APAS and so on, just isn't ready to install the RPMs to run your infrastructure, to run your Docker containers. So don't forget the OS, it's still important. And you can still have problems with not being able to run the latest version of Docker. And also watch out for different versions of Docker and image compatibility, because it is a problem. So this world of it runs everywhere exactly the same, not quite. Networking, SDNs. SDNs are everywhere with Docker, software-defined networks. Do you already have a strategic solution? How does it fit in with that? Will it impact performance? Is performance a big deal for you? These are questions worth considering. Cloud providers. Do you want to run on an Amazon or an Azure? If so, how is that going to... do you want to tie yourself into their solution, or do you want to make your solution able to lift and shift? Very easy to take their solution, very difficult to get off it potentially. And training. Are people ready to understand, manage, build containers? This hasn't been so much of a problem for us, but I think as it penetrates into the market more, as it penetrates into the organization more, you're going to find more pockets of people who don't want to learn it, aren't interested. The early adopters are very keen. How are we doing for time? Yeah? Okay. So not far from the end now. So tips. So I feel like I'm teaching grandmothers to suck eggs, not that you all look like grandmothers, but these are the sort of things that I've learned over the last 18 months about how to get this sort of change through. So if you're working in a consensual organisation, building coalitions of interest is really powerful. So we have the concept of working groups, people call them guilds, or you have champions, or whatever horrible enterprise word you have for it. Some concept of side of desk working will exist. And these can be great for keeping everyone in touch, and when it does come to having a conversation about deploying something or thinking about doing something, if you have that network already in place, it's very powerful. Engaging parties early. So it's very easy to say, well, we'll worry about security later, or we'll worry about audit later, or we'll worry about that team later, whatever. But actually, you get massive benefits from going out to those people very early and saying, we want to talk about this. They may say we're not interested or whatever, but you get points for that. You get credit for that, and you can cash in that credit later. And in a kind of related way, don't focus on those already into it. It's very easy, if you're a Docker advocate like me, to only talk to the people who are already sold on it, because you can have lovely conversations about how the world's going to be different, but actually those people are already going to be working for you anyway. You want to go and talk to the people who aren't convinced, the key decision makers who might take some persuasion. And many of them don't see necessarily the benefits even for them in this new world. Start small, classic agile kind of mentality, but if you try and go for a big bang, this is the solution for everything and everyone, you'll inevitably disappoint. So having a small solution which perhaps covers a limited number of use cases allows you to build up that experience and change that culture. And I would definitely say, I was a bit skeptical when I joined, but I'd definitely say that using an APAS is a very powerful way to save time and money. Pretty self-explanatory. So I talked earlier about culture, and if you can reverse engineer the culture and figure out how things actually get done, that will help you a lot. Building an internal map of the organization and how it functions is really critical. You could get a lot of mileage very cheaply from reusing existing processes. So I talked earlier about, is it an RPM or is it a VM? It's very tempting to build a whole new set of business processes around this new thing, but actually it's going to be very hard to do that. And if you can just say, well, this is really a kind of RPM, and if people buy that argument, great. Or you can just say, yeah, okay, let's treat it as a VM. But definitely, people are very receptive to those arguments, and it's a very useful way to get things done. And don't try and fight a 120,000 people company, because you'll just fail. So you kind of have to start with that approach. I found teaching, so I teach Git within my organization, and it's a great way of getting people on your side. So I teach Git, which not everyone has been trained in or is experienced in, and through that I get lots of contacts through the organization of people who are able to help me. Similar to what I said before, don't fight it. People are just doing their job. If they're blocking you, it's usually with good reason from their point of view. And beware of Docker Enterprise anti-patterns. So one big one is team that isn't involved with centralized infra decides they want to do stuff quicker, so they go and build something in AWS outside the organization. And then they say, right, we've built this amazing thing. How do we get it in? And you go, well, where do I start? There's so many hoops to go through. And there's not thinking about all these things in advance. If you have the luxury of being able to think about all these things in advance, it's far better than doing something as a one-off project, because you can't really reuse that. So building something that thinks about all these different things, even if it's we'll have to buy something for that later, is a useful thing, because everyone will come on board with you and contribute as you go forward. Okay, if you work for a big organization, I'd say don't beat yourself up. It's very easy to... Organizations are very down on themselves about how bad they are at delivering things, but the fact is, if an organization exists, it's making money somewhere, probably, hopefully. If it's going to be around for a long time, it is. So, yeah, be critical of your own organization, but don't beat yourself up about it. There are always things to improve, but there's also good things you don't necessarily see. Have faith, because it can be a long wait to get things done sometimes, and then lots of things can happen at once. And we're hiring. So I didn't say who I work for, and there's a reason for that, but we are hiring. My boss said to say he's really cool, which he is. If you want to talk to me about opportunities where we are to work in this space, not specifically Docker, but as part of a team involved in that and related areas, do let me know. And finally, thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. So, any questions?
I've got more of a comment. Someone who kind of tries to work the culture of a very big organisation. In that your anti-patterns towards the end, in that I've done both of those things. I've created something in the cloud and created something departmental specific. And they are anti-patterns, but equally, sometimes you have to prove that something is going to work before you're given the kind of green light to go ahead and that you can sell it to the organisation. Certainly in our organisation, there's a lot of currency around things that work, things that make money, things that save money. And whilst you're talking about stuff, you get a lot of cynicism. You get a lot of people going, wow, this is just fancy new ideas that never work, the real world isn't like that, all that kind of stuff. And so once you've actually done something, even if it is a departmental cloud-only project which you've kind of just gone through that and done, you can kind of wave it at people and go, look, we've made this work, it's really good, it's saving us money, why don't we do this properly? And I think there's a real, again, about working the organisation.
Yeah.
There can be a real value in that.
So the comment is around delivering stuff in the anti-pattern I talked about outside the organisation. So yeah, I'd agree totally that if you can demonstrate that something works in principle, that always has value. The difficulty with that in the organisation that I work for now is that what we sort of say is that's the easy bit. So you could take a Jenkins pipeline, for example. So I go at home, I apt-get install Jenkins, I build a pipeline, it's running, it's great. But to me, that doesn't prove anything about that technology. I know that's possible. I can write a bash script to do automation. That said, it depends who you're selling to. If you're selling to someone who doesn't get that, showing them something that works is a massive benefit. And it goes back to where's the money?
Yeah.
So if the person with the checkbook is persuaded by that, definitely do that. But certainly where I work, there's a much larger group of people you have to persuade and a lot of boxes to tick before you've even persuaded anyone of anything. And the whole mindset of the organisation is around that consensus. So no one's going to say yes on their own. They're going to go and talk to each other and gradually a thing emerges. But all that said, the power of a good demo, we all know that, don't we?
Sometimes you just have to find a way to make something happen. And
Yeah.
That's different from organisation to organisation.
Yes.
You've got to find out how to pull the right levers and what we need to do to get something.
Yeah, absolutely.
What tend to be the main benefits of Docker and related technologies for enterprise people that may otherwise be quite skeptical of this technology? Seem to be
I think I think actually there's a lot of enthusiasm about the technology. So people really do get the benefits. I don't come across many people who say this is a waste of time. I come across the odd person who used Solaris who says we were doing this 10 years ago. And they're kind of right. If you talk to Brian Cantrell, he'll tell you the same thing. But I don't think it's a difficulty of selling it to the business, or they get the benefits in terms of the DevOps processes are facilitated, the continuous integration, the faster time to market, the portable workloads. All these benefits are kind of pre-sold. The difficulty is extracting money from the business, because they'll have heard solutions like this. An experienced senior IT manager in a big organisation has heard about all these things for the last 20 years and how they're going to revolutionise the world, and they're going to be a bit more sceptical, but not in a negative way, just kind of naturally. It's that's kind of the difficulty. You have to persuade the right people at the right time. Hi.
Hi. You mentioned that the you know, in a big registry or big repository can be a problem. What's your feelings towards having lots of different registries instead?
Yeah, that's definitely one approach. The difficulty that I've seen with that approach is the difficulty of, well, the audit question. So if you've got hundreds of artifact repositories, let's take Docker out of the equation, and someone says, we don't like this jar file, we've got to get rid of it from our organization. Have you got an inventory of artifactory stores? Do you have control over them? Do you know who runs them? Do you know where they're running? Do you know in what networks they're running? That's.
I was thinking I could have one production repository and then maybe it might make that job a little bit easier. Because you could have a bad repository with all that horrible dev stuff where people are putting whatever they want in.
Yeah.
Maybe you could keep something to one side and say that's the good one.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Again, a complete registry solution may have that concept inbuilt in it. So you have this sort of segregation. Signing will be a great, in fact, I think signing offers the promise of that. So that the promise is you've got an image in there, that tells you nothing about the safety of that image. But if it's been signed by QA, if it's been signed by security, if it's been signed by, and this can all be done in an automated way, if it ticks all those boxes, it can run on these set of production instances. Whereas the other ones can run over here on your segregated network or on developer machines. So you could do that with one registry, but the problem is always going to be about control and centralization. Dev teams love to have their own Jenkins instance, their own this, that, and the other. But then when there's a plugin, in Jenkins that's insecure, what do you do then? Who's responsible? Hi.
If you start from scratch today,
Mm-hmm.
you start again with OpenShift.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the organization I work for has a relationship with Red Hat. They used OpenShift version 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was an upgrade path for them. Sorry, if you don't know, OpenShift version 2 didn't use Docker. It was a Ruby application, which I think was bought from another company, and it basically kind of did what Docker did. It had a concept of cartridges, which is very similar to the concept of images. It was a cluster-based solution, but then Docker came along and Kubernetes, and Red Hat just threw it all away and rewrote from scratch. Well, rewrote using those etc.d, Kubernetes, and Docker. So it was a complete rewrite. So although we were on V2, it wasn't really kind of yum upgrade OpenShift, but that made it easier from a kind of organizational point of view to move into it. But that said, I think it is a market leader, and they're heavily investing in it. And as the platform matures, features are coming thick and fast that we could never have built ourselves or maintained ourselves. So I've seen another anti-pattern, which is organizations building their own APAs. In fact, when I joined my company, it was one of the first things my boss said was, you always end up building your own APAs. And I said, yeah, but surely we can build a thing to do that thing. And he said, no, you're building an APAs, you just don't know it. Because you solve all these separate problems, you end up with something that behemoth you have to maintain. And that's, you don't want to be there.
Do you ever worry about locking?
Always.
But Kubernetes, but they're not, and all their kind of extensions are, quite opinionated.
Yeah. I mean, you can't avoid a certain kind of lock-in. I mean, the quote I heard recently was, "Open source with vendor support is the new lock-in." And I was having a discussion with someone earlier tonight about moving to cloud, and you've got lock-in there. Arguably a different kind of lock-in, because you can stop.
But as on the cloud, and you still be locking.
Well, some people are thinking about doing that.
How are you coping with culture change in your org as you're bringing new people, because you're hiring and they come in expecting Docker and CAS, and you don't know the old world? How are you?
Well, I work in an industry that isn't hiring at a massive rate at the moment, except for my team. So but I mean, I don't think anyone's joined since me, around me. So I was the one who had to deal with a culture shock. But I think it's a common pattern for people to join organisations, and they're sold on using a certain technology in their job or set of technologies, and then they realise, oh, I'm still going to be having to curate old stuff too. But it's not a huge problem that we've seen yet. But I think if you hire badly, you'll give people the wrong expectation when they arrive, and you've got to watch for that. Any more questions? Hi.
You mentioned security updates.
Yep.
How do you do security updates?
Do you mean in the old world or the new world?
The new world.
We have a set of base images. We update those on a regular cadence, and then we monitor the live infrastructure. We audit the live infrastructure and determine how far out of date people are. So that's fine for the most case, because you say, oh, you're far too out of date. You send them an email, you say you've got 3 months before it's your problem, not our problem. As in your problem from an audit perspective. Someone's going to get fired in your team, not our team, that kind of thing. So it's a lovely world. But we've not had a shell shock yet. And as the platform grows and more production workloads go on it, that picture will change. And I think we're going to have to get a lot slicker about that process. But we've started, relatively small, yeah. Any more? Okay, I think that's it.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.